Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas. This is how to make a third-person platformer in Unity, and welcome to episode 6. So this time we are going to take a look at rotating the skybox right here to make it look like there's some life in our world. We'll look at a timer, we'll look at score, and if we have time, that's when we'll start looking into further scripting. So let's start with actually working on the timer itself. So if we double click on timer 001, what we're going to do is I'm going to start with, let's say, 150 seconds. So if we go to our scripts folder, right click, create, and C# script, I'm going to put in global timer. Now let's open this up in Visual Studio. And much like we did in the last episode, what we need to do is add in a namespace at the top because we're using UI elements again. So using Unity engine.ui semicolon. Now what we need to do is we need to add in a couple of variables this time. We need two variables for the text on screen, because if you remember, we've got the black behind and the white in front, just to kind of see if that makes much of a difference visually. So we'll start by going public game object time display 01, and same again, public game object time display 02. Next thing we need is we need a true or false statement. So we need to know if, for example, we're currently subtracting a second from our time, true or false, and we do that using another type of variable called a bool. So public bool, and we'll call it is taking time semicolon. Now the idea of what we're going to do here is keep subtracting a second every time. So we're going to need to have an integer. So public int, and we'll call it the seconds semicolon. Now we don't need void update at the moment. We don't need void start at all. What we do need is a new method, and instead of using void, we need to use a method using IEnumerator. The reason we use IEnumerator is because we're pausing technically or modifying time flow itself rather than using it in void, because it can't really do it. So IEnumerator, and let's call it subtract second, open close bracket, open curly bracket, and hit enter to start that up. Now what we do need is in void update we need to have an if statement. An if statement is going to be where we say, oh, here we are, this is what we need to do if this is true. So in this case, if, and in brackets we have is taking time equals, that's double equals there, false. So in this case we have to remember that in this if statement, usually if we want something to be equal to something, we put the double equals. So if it is false, then what we do is we go start coroutine, and in brackets the name of that IEnumerator that we have. So subtract second, then open close bracket, semicolon. Now just to run through what we've done here is every frame we're checking if the time taken is equal to false, at which point we should probably set our default when the script starts to false. And we can do that by going up here, public bool is taking time, and then putting equals false. So as soon as the script starts, it's seeing that that's equal to false, and so it will instantly go down here to the coroutine called subtract second, right there. Once we do that, what we then need to do is create a piece of code which will allow us to subtract a second and then display it on screen. So our default is going to be at the top and we'll make it equal to 150. Now, what we do here is we display, or rather take away from that seconds and then display straight away. So what we do is the seconds is minus equal 1 semicolon, and then at that same point we need to display that on our two game objects. So time display 01 dot get component, and you'll remember this from the last time, text in the spiky brackets, open close brackets, dot text equals, and if you remember, we actually put what we wanted to put within quotes. We kind of do that here, but we have to do it a little bit differently. We put the double quote and then plus and then the seconds semicolon. So what's happening here is within this component of text we're putting blank text and then whatever is contained in the variable called the seconds. The reason we have to put this double quote here is because it's expecting text format, but the seconds itself is actually in number format. So we have to kind of fool it a little bit. The same then applies to time display 02, and we can copy that line of code and paste it below and just change it to 02. Now, for those eagle-eyed viewers out there, they may be looking at this thinking, hang on a second, it's still false. So this is going to run every single frame as well because it's starting the coroutine. That is where we have to put at the very top is taking time equals true semicolon, because we are taking some time away. So once we've changed the seconds, displayed it on the screen, we then have to wait for a second before we can run it again. And what we do is go yield return new and then wait for seconds, and in brackets we'll have 1 second semicolon. After that 1 second we can then set is taking time back to false, so it can run all over again. So it won't run every single frame, this section, because we're stopping it from running because we're waiting before we run the next line of code. So let's save that script and then head back to Unity. Now we basically have our timer working as we would expect now. So what we'll do is we'll set our time to be 150 on both, and you can see it's ready and waiting. And now if we go game object, create empty, F2 to rename, and let's have this as global timer object, and then drag and drop. And all we have to do now is take a look at our variables over here and drag and drop those variables over. So timer 001 and timer 002. And we can see that the other variables are active right there. So now, if we press play, we should see our timer counting down. Perfect. So now we have the basis of a restriction on what we're doing in the game. So we have 150 seconds to do what we need to do. So at this point, what we'll do is let's work on our score correctly. So every time we collect a gem, we wanted to add to our score rather than just set it as 1,000 points. So I'm going to take the score box, set it to 0, and in the script folder, we'll create another script called global score. So right click, create C# script, and call this global score. And let's open that up in Visual Studio as well. And same again, we need to use the namespace at the top using Unity engine.ui semicolon. So we don't need void start with this because we're going to use void update all the time, and we don't need these annotations, so we can get rid of those. What we do need is the actual box itself, the game object. So public game object, and we're going to refer to this as score box box, like we did in the other one, and semicolon. Next thing we need to do is have something which is called a static variable. Now what this means is that we can reference this variable from other scripts within the game. And to do that, we need to type the words public and then static. And we'll just call this an integer, and it'll be called, let's have current score. So current score, semicolon. I also like to do something called an internal variable. The reason being is that this static prevents it from displaying in our inspector panel. So like in our global timer object, all our variables appear here within the components. However, if something is static, it will not appear. So to counteract this, we go public int, and I'll call it internal score, semicolon. So at this point, we need to make both of these scores equal to the same. The current score is the master score, the one which will be updated, and the internal score is just for our viewing purposes. So we need to make internal score equal to current score, semicolon. Now, what we need to do at this point is then have the UI display what we have as our score. So if we go to our gem silver script, we can see the scorebox.getComponent.text. We can select this line of code, hold Control and X to cut it, and then place it in void update. And much in the same way as we did with our global timer, we need to make the text equal to double quote and then plus the internal score. So internal score. So what this is doing here is every frame it is just updating our internal score to be the correct score, which is current, and then in the component of text in our score box, it's updating it with the score itself. So what that means, when we save that script and then head to our gem silver script, what we can then do excuse me, is reference the global score script. So global score and then dot, because we're going to reference the current score. We can see it highlighted there. So current score plus equals, and then whatever value you want the actual gem to be. So in this case, I want it to be worth 1,000 points. So it will add 1,000 to whatever we have set currently in the global score. So let's save our script, head back to Unity. And if we click on our silver gem itself, you won't see much of a change. It's still going to make the dinging sound. It's still going to do everything we need to. But what we need to do now is place our global score script on a game object. So game object, create empty, F2 to rename, and we'll call this global score object. And let's drag and drop global score onto there. And you'll notice, yes, we have the 3 variables, but we only have 2 displaying here because remember, as I said, this shows that the static does not appear in the inspector panel. So now let's just drag and drop the score box straight onto there. Perfect. And just to show this actually working correctly, what I'm going to do is take this silver gem and I'm going to duplicate it a couple of times so we can see the score adding whenever we pick a new one up. So put it there, put it there, and let's have this one over here. So we actually have 4 gems. Every time we collect one, it will add 1,000 to our score. So let's try that out. There we go, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Perfect. So you can see the scoring system working as intended. Now, overall, there is a lot more to do on this, but I feel like every episode we come through now, we're getting more and more towards having an actually working game. You could literally take this now and work on it yourself. Obviously, there's plenty more to learn and we'll go through loads of different things, but I'm excited for where this series is going to go. So, guys, next episode, let me think. We are going to rotate this Skybox. We're going to make the Skybox look more active next episode. I promise it'll be the first thing we do. We'll also look at death and lives as well, because if we fall off, we want to kind of, well, die as it were, maybe have lives, maybe we respawn. We'll work out what we come to there. So guys, until that next episode, thank you very much for watching.